All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, FBI Insights on Fighting Cybercrime. My name is Megan Reed. I'm the VP of Marketing at NetGain Technologies. Now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for today's conversation, Mr. Eric Powers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Megan, and welcome everybody to our FBI Insights on Fighting Crime webinar presented by both NetGain Technologies and Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Again, my name is Eric Powers. I'm the moderator today, but I'm also in my day job a channel solution architect here at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, working together with NetGain on a daily basis, discussing things like cybersecurity, as well as the overarching HP technology portfolio, and making sure they have the resources that they need to be successful. And I'm super excited to be here once again today with some great experts talking to you all and answering all of your burning questions about cyber criminals and about cybersecurity specifically, and how to address that type of activity everywhere from the enterprises all the way down to the small and medium business and everything in between. So we have two exciting speakers that are joining me here today that will answer all of your questions. And again, as Megan said, please feel free to add any questions at any point down in the chat, in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure to bring up those questions throughout the presentation and get to as many as possible. And again, make sure those questions as well are really applicable to the whole audience if possible. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. And I would like to introduce James Morrison. So James is actually part of the HP team as well. He is a distinguished technologist here at HPE, as well as a cybersecurity expert and former FBI agent. So James, would you go ahead and introduce yourself a little more?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. James Morrison started with HP in December of last year, retired from the FBI after 22 years working out of the Houston and Albuquerque offices, especially the last 8 years working cybercrime, nation state as well as criminal, and then really focused at the last probably 3 years of that on establishing better relationships between the FBI and private sector. So worked very closely with a lot of the oil and gas companies, small and medium businesses, chambers of commerce, and really where it's come out is I realized that this is the world we live in now. Cybercrime is absolutely going to be one of the greatest threats to our economy. I've used that quote a number of times. I really believe if we don't start getting our hands around it, we're going to see the largest drain of our economy coming out of having to pay things like ransom, for example. And I think there's a stat out there that says by next year, global cybercrime will cost up to $6 trillion, which is a third of the GDP of the United States. We've seen huge ransomware increases here in 2020. We're seeing $1 million payouts now. There's rumor that Garmin and Honda Motors may have paid multiple millions of dollars to get their data back. There's no safety and anonymity. If you think you're not going to get hit because fill in the blank, I'm too small, I'm in the wrong vertical, blah, 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 whatever. They're all BS. Every company is a target. Cybercrime rule number 1 says every company is a target. And if I was to stand at your door on January 1st, I would say you have a 1 in 4 chance of being hit in any calendar year. Ransomware is every 11 seconds, somewhere in the United States or Western Europe. That's reality. And ransomware now is going to steal your data too. Maze and NetWalker, which are 2 newer variants that popped up here in 2020, are stealing data as well as encrypting it. So, it's only a matter of time till you get hit, unless you start taking some positive steps to do what you need to do. And so, even though I work for HPE, I try to stay somewhat product agnostic because there's a ton of solutions out there. And we like working with companies like Netgear to help you find a solution that works for you. There are no homogeneous networks anymore. Every network is got a whole hodgepodge of different equipment across it. So when you're looking at security solutions, you got to make sure something's going to work in your environment. And that's why we like to work with you and just see what we can do to make you more secure. I often tell the story of it's like an ADT sign in your front yard. That ADT sign, when the robber comes up, they don't know if you really are there or not, but the next door neighbor doesn't have one. Sometimes they're going to pick that one just because it may be less low-hanging fruit. So every step we take to make yourself less of a target is extremely valuable, and that's the world we got to live in.
Well, thank you, James. And you bring up a lot of good points there in the intro. We're going to talk about more in depth throughout today's session, not only about what type of crimes are out there and how to address those, but really how to protect yourself and be proactive in the standpoint of security. And that's really a good tie into our next speaker here today, guys. Mr. Scott Logan is the Director of Security at NetGain Technologies. And again, we're really excited to have Scott here today to talk together with James about this exciting subject and a subject that's necessary to talk about. So, Scott, would you go ahead and introduce yourself a little further?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eric. And man, it's a pleasure to be on the panel with James. I love hearing this guy talk. I am the Director of Security, as Eric mentioned, for NetGain Technologies. We are an MSP. We are a managed service provider for our clients. And I am a CISSP, a Certified Information System Security Professional. And I help NetGain position their security controls as an MSP to be protective for our clients, as our relationship to those clients are important. I also provide Chief Security Officer, or what we call virtual CSO services for a lot of our clients to help them drive and direct their security posturing, to help position them so that they're more aligned with maybe a compliance control, or whether it's just an element of security prevention and control that they need to implement. And so I help drive that. When I'm managing and directing security, it's important that we build the security foundation and not try to plug in on the backside security controls to help implement security protection. And that's one of the things I help drive with organizations when they're implementing the application, when they're implementing new project deployment, is to focus on the ideology that security needs to be first. Let's build that foundation of security, and then let's build our application, our project deployments upon that. And that's probably our primary control. And I can't agree more with what James said about the elements of ransomware, the threats that are out there, the impact that they have on businesses now. I look forward to those discussions as we go through our webinar today.
Yeah, Scott, I mean, you bring up a good point there also. So HPE, we actually are establishing a security SWAT team with all of us getting our CISSP. So you and I need to talk. I'm taking my test in a month, and we recognize as a technology company that everybody has to be able to have those conversations, and credibility is part of that. I mean, that's why I'm here, is, you know, the FBI credibility, but also showing that I've been in the security realm and I've been in IT for 30 plus years. And so when companies come forward and say, what do I do? I think a lot of what we do is the advisory services are going to be a huge part of the world we live in, and work with somebody who can help you answer the questions you have.
Agreed.
That's a great point, guys. I think we're going to lead up to that at the very end of today's discussion around creating a strategy. It seems like is the one thing that most organizations that we see on a daily basis are missing, that foundation like you were referring to, Scott. So we're going to get there throughout today's presentation, but let's start off at somewhere I think that's probably relevant to everybody on the line today. And again, guys, feel free to ask any questions that you think are relevant to our speakers within the Q&A box. But as we've seen, cybercrime, especially over the last few years, has been rising, but COVID-19 and the rise of the coronavirus has really exponentially just driven that to a whole new level, and things that levels we didn't think we'd ever reach for 10 plus years are now almost becoming reality today. For example, I know I was talking to a customer the other day who was just a small organization, but they had an employee working from home, didn't log in to their VPN to do their work on their laptop, logged into their bank, got an email. The email said, claim your stimulus check here. It looked like it was from their bank. They went in, clicked the button. When they clicked the button, they had ransomware get into their environment and back to the organization itself, to the business. But not only that, they went in and logged in with their bank credentials. So it was a basically 2-for-1 deal. In this chaotic situation that is this year in 2020, what are you guys seeing from a change of what things were like before COVID to now when it comes to cybercrime and how we address cybercrime? And maybe let's go ahead and start with you, James, on that question, and then we'll go to Scott from there.
Yeah, so we often said in the Bureau that cyber criminals say no crisis should go unpunished. Every time you see a crisis, and it doesn't matter where it is in the world, about 15 months ago, we had Tropical Storm Imelda come through the Houston area, and there was some serious flooding in the East Texas area, in Beaumont, Orange, Port Arthur. And we saw ransomware rise by about 150% against companies that were in that area. We've seen that with the wildfires in Colorado. where any company that's inside of a sort of a threatened area, these groups are doing some homework and they're targeting you. So what we have in COVID is just a nationwide issue now. I read some statistics that said in March alone, scam emails went up 667% in 1 month. The number of websites just around COVID went from about 20,000 to over a million, 8.4 million websites that have COVID in their name, and 90% of those are scam related. Ransomware climbed about 150 to 200% between March and May. And we saw, like I said, the rise of new versions. NetWalker has made $25 million in 3 months. March, April, and May, the NetWalker ransomware group made over $25 million. And people are 3 times more likely right now to click on a link about COVID than they are anything. Social engineering in the middle of crisis creates opportunity for these criminal groups. And it's you're right. They're looking for the 2-for-1s. They're looking for the 3-for-1s. The business email compromise is part of it too, where if I can get into your email system, I mean, I can start scamming money out of the business. And how long is it going to take you to find them? Mandiant says that for somebody inside your network, it can take 78 days on average for you to detect someone in your network. That's if they don't launch ransomware against you. So that means if somebody got in your network today, you would find them somewhere around January 5th, 8th, somewhere around there. That's a long time to be in your system just doodling around. We've got to get better. And what we've said is, but as technology companies, we got to get better. As partners, NetGain is a partnership, needs to make sure that the products that they're talking to their customers with are security oriented. And the customer needs to make sure that when they're deploying new products, security is built in, not bolted on. We have to demand better from what we're buying. And that means sometimes you're going to go, well, I may pay a little bit more, but I know it's secure. I know I'm doing something positive. So that's just where we are now in today's world. It's security our companies depend on it. Your company, if you're a small or medium business and you get hit with ransomware, you may go out of business. Small businesses often go out of business after getting hit with ransomware, and I think the number is 60% within 6 months, and they cite ransomware as part of that reasoning.
Wow, that's a really good point you bring up, James. And maybe Scott, maybe you can elaborate that. What is working from home and having to work from home for many organizations, especially in some sensitive areas like healthcare and like financial and others? How has that made things even more complex and maybe a little easier than before for cyber criminals to find ways to get into organizations?
Great question, Eric. It was a big shift, right, in infrastructure, and actually, and it's unfortunate that the shift was managed a lot of times by IT quickly, with the idea of being accessible to infrastructure and not protective of infrastructure, and that's just a poor design. When you look at working at home orders, and some elements of utilizing remote desktop protocol was utilized, utilizing VPNs. Kaspersky put out a report that RDP attacks grew 400% in March and April alone. And RDP attacks is a primary vector for ransomware deliverables. It actually utilizes a resource that's available on the outside, and once recognized that it's there, it brute forces its way in and then causes strife in the infrastructure. It is an unfortunate characteristic of the deployment and the necessity of IT being enforced by management to say, okay, guys, I need all my workers to work from home now. I want it done quickly. And they did, and they did it weekly. And that's the problem. And when you're working from home, you're not as conscious, you're not as sensitive to what you're doing at the business. You're making decisions maybe in a more relaxed state. You're a little bit more off guard than you normally would be if you're working within your business. And so those email scams that James was talking about are more prevalent. They know that. They know that you're not paying attention. And if you're not practicing great, proper authentication values, and you're taking the same credentials that you use at work to use at bank, to work at social, they're going to take advantage of that 2, 3 for 1 stuff. So, I mean, that's the element that really happened when management said we need to shift our infrastructure and start working from home. It was done quickly and not securely.
And to piggyback on that, I was going to say, I mean, I know some companies where, you know, the people said, I don't have a laptop or a computer at home, or you know, and they took desktops off their desk at work and actually took them home. And so security was always an afterthought. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot more conversation now about security. How do I get there, right? So what do I do now? And so virtual desktop infrastructures, remote applications, you know, using the cloud. And how do I use the cloud to enable better security? Because what you're also saying is now we have these home networks. So what else is on these home networks? So we have kids staying home. So we have kids on their game platforms. We have kids on their laptops, you know, doing YouTube, surfing, or whatever. So as a criminal, what I'm looking at is if I can get a foothold into a home network now, I can leverage that attack into a computer that is logging into a corporate network, and then move in. And so IoT is a target more, things like Ring doorbells and those kind of devices. So and if you're not securing or sniffing the traffic that's coming in from these remote workers, you're directly connecting in like VPN without any sort of filtering. You're giving full access to every device on that home network into your corporate network. And just it becomes kind of a cesspool. And there's a cybersecurity mantra that says you're only as secure as the least secure network you connect to. So,
and James is right in the effort that I don't think a lot of people actually set up their Wi-Fi with the understanding that they would be connecting to their home network, or to their business network.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point.
I've done war driving. I mean, I've seen a number of cases where people have. I mean, we caught a guy here in Houston that was an installer for one of the cable TV companies, and he had written down all the passwords on the Wi-Fi routers. And so what he would do is he knew all the houses that he'd installed, and he'd go by them and he could put a little antenna and actually connect up to their Wi-Fis. And there's a ton of cases of that kind of stuff where people are using other people's Wi-Fi to commit crimes. And I mean, those are cases. I mean, stories I can go on and on and on about, over time of how Wi-Fi is horrifically unsafe. And if your password's never been changed, or it's the default when you bought it, it's just easy to break into.
So guys, the biggest thing to learn from today is don't use password 123 as your password. Okay, guys, that's the one thing. If you take one thing away,
and don't
get better
use the same password across multiple sites, like Scott was saying. 2/3 of people on the internet use the same password on multiple websites. So you lose one password and I've got it for every place else. It's like,
Well, yeah, for the example that we talked about a few minutes ago with that lady who had worked for that organization, put in her bank user credentials. There's nothing stopping that criminal from going to other popular sites, trying the exact same thing, and then making it even a bigger deal. And so, you brought up this good point, guys. This idea of the work and the personal, our professional and personal planes of our lives kind of combining during this year and really morphing to a standpoint we haven't seen before. But I think also it takes worth noting, maybe some of the people behind some of these crimes are maybe not who we think they are. Maybe if you could comment on this, and let's start with you, Scott, actually this time. From your standpoint, who are these people who are doing this sort of thing? Are these just individual actors? Is this some nerdy guy with the Superman shirt on sitting in a closet at his home, at his his parents' house doing this, or is this a nation state that are doing these type of things? Scott, let's start with you, and then James, if you want to piggyback off of it.
Okay.
I'm going to answer that with a yes and a no. It is the guy that's sitting in his basement doing something malicious, but it's also a nation state attack. It actually is a crime syndicate that is doing this now. It's much easier to establish an attack through a cyber attack than it is to walk into a bank and pull out a gun and ask for money. Why do that when I can hold a business completely hostage using a cyber influence? And so criminals have recognized that. Syndicates have recognized that, and they've adopted that into their platform of being able to achieve more criminal mischief activity throughout the world. And it's unfortunate that type of attacking is happening to businesses, and the amount of impact that those attacks now have to business is different than what it was just a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, ransomware was, I'm going to encrypt your data and I'm going to hold it hostage. But now I'm going to encrypt your data, I'm going to hold it hostage, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to destroy your backups. And if I got an opportunity to get to your storage, I'm going to destroy your actual online. And if I have your data, I'm going to sell it on the dark web if you don't pay me the money that I'm asking for. It's a much more involved attack than it ever used to be. And businesses just aren't prepared for doing that. They don't have their alignment of restoration. Their backups aren't air gapped to where they're not available for being influenced by that attack. And so a lot of businesses sit there and they find out, man, we can't even recover now. So maybe paying the hostage the money that they're requesting for in Cybercoin is our only option. And that's horrible to think that that's the options that are out there. So we have to be more preventive in the element of attack. We have to recognize it. You know, I saw an article on the PRN News, and they said that the FBI recently reported the number of complaints about cyber attacks to the cyber division there was as many as 4,000 a day. That's 400% increase from what it was prior to the time of the COVID-19 period. So think about that when you start thinking about the amount of attacks that are happening to organizations.
Well, and Scott, you're absolutely right. I mean, they are crime syndicates now. Probably 85% of cybercrime is being run by these criminal groups, very organized. A lot of them have 24/7 operations and data centers, and they're financially backed. In some cases, they're financially backed by nation states. There have been a lot of indications that certain nation states find it easier to hire a criminal to commit an action, and then they have plausible deniability. So you can't say, well, it was, whoever. And also because of, wealth disparity, we've seen attacks coming out of countries that we've never seen before, like Nigeria, India, Pakistan. The drug cartels are getting involved in it now because it is so lucrative. And it's so easy to get into that I don't even have to have a high price point. I can go out on the dark web. I can rent ransomware now as a service. I can install it. I can run the attack, and all I have to do is pay them 40% of my profit. It's a crazy world, so I think sometimes companies want to think that it's some person's living in a basement, but really in the reality, these are fully organized, targeting us in many cases, especially Ryuk. I mean, Ryuk has been one that has risen recently. They're the one that hit the United Health Group up there in Pennsylvania, and they're a Russian crime group. Now, in Russia, you don't operate in Russia unless Russia lets you operate there, typically. So we know that they have some sort of nation state backing because of that. So let's start looking at it of we're not going to be able to stop that. The FBI is overwhelmed. I'll say that. I mean, in Houston, we had 42 people working cybercrime for 12 million people, and 2/3 of them were working nation states. So you figure that out. That's 14 people working 12 million people's cybercrime. It's just there's not enough. So we can't expect that we're going to get a lot of from that. The FBI does a great job on investigation and prosecution, but because these guys are mostly outside the United States, the odds of them actually ending up in a court is probably low. So let's start deploying better technology. Let's start having a conversation. Let's rely upon innovation to get us over the hump and be better.
And you bring up a good point that I want to get to here, and I want to do one more question on the subject, and then let's move on to the strategy of how to address this, and from a technology standpoint, innovation across the whole organization. The final question I had about this point, though, before we move on, though, was I know the FBI, for example, has a center, 24/7 operations center and watch floor called CyWatch that's constantly looking at this and addressing those concerns that I know Scott brought up that they were on the rise exponentially this year. I think 4,000 a day calls every day. But what we're seeing is that the cost of these type of attacks are costing on average globally for just the SMB space $3.9 million. It gets even crazier when you think of large enterprises compared to this. So my question is, as we go into this, is cybersecurity insurance something that people can think about as a possible avenue to make sure that they're protected from these type of events?
Well, not something you should think about. It's something you need to have, period. I mean, I don't know why you would not have an insurance policy. The problem with it is a lot of people are relying upon it to protect them from ransomware by paying the ransom. Those days are going to end at some point. The insurance companies can't keep paying out these ransomware payments without they're going to start saying, what are you doing to protect yourself? The insurance companies are starting to demand more accountability from companies for that. And I think one of the greater values of cyber insurance comes from the relationships that your insurance company has with like incident response companies. They may have with virtual CISOs like NetGain offers. No matter what the size of a company, there's no reason today not to hire a security officer in the cloud. You can't afford one, that's great. There are a ton of those kind of opportunities, and help. Let's make sure you're getting good policies in place. Make sure that your culture has a culture of security. I was talking to a guy about right before the COVID pandemic, I think it was January, and he said, I'm a security officer, I'm trying to implement multi-factor authentication. My CEO doesn't agree with it. I said, then you'll never succeed. Because if the culture of security doesn't come all the way down from the top and everybody's bought in, including board of directors, we're like, my dad doesn't do it, why would I do it? It's just the nature of it. So you've got to make sure all of those things are in place, and that's the value of cyber insurance. We're also seeing with cyber insurance, they're starting to look at cybersecurity products and evaluate those products, and that's like Marsh created a program called Cyber Catalyst, and they evaluate products, and from that, they determine that some products, in their estimation, actually do better about reducing risk than others. And so that was where HP has bought into that, and we've got some products that have been identified by Cyber Catalyst. But there's other products on the list like KnowBe4, which is a phishing email testing. Wouldn't that be a great list to go look at to make sure that you are at least evaluating those products before you make a decision?
James, you hit the nail on the head with the idea that tools have to be in place. I challenge everybody to go back and get your cyber policy out of the cabinet, dust it off, blow it off, read through it, and look for the small print. The small print is going to tell you that you have to be doing certain controls. If you're not doing social engineering understanding for your employees, you may not get assistance when it comes down to needing your cyber insurance. There are certain controls that have to be in place. You have to be practicing good housekeeping on your side in order to have that cyber insurance protection. It's kind of like saying that you're not a smoker and you are with your life insurance. You've got to be practicing what they tell you need to be practicing. So read your fine print and make sure that you're doing what you need to do to get that protection.
Yeah, there are a number of cases out there. There's case law of companies that have not gotten their insurance paid out because of exactly that. They haven't done the good housekeeping, and it's interesting. And I think there's going to be cyber insurance is the fastest growing area in the insurance industry. The problem is that like car insurance, we don't have the data yet to support who pays what and how much. So as insurance companies gather that data, they're going to start looking at, oh, you're a manufacturing company, your insurance rate's going to be higher than a bank, for example, because banks tend to be more restrictive. Oh, you're a healthcare organization. Well, healthcare organizations tend to be less secure or more targeted than somebody else. And so you're going to start seeing insurance rates change and deviate depending upon what vertical you're in, what size you are, and past history. You get hit with ransomware once, the odds of getting ransomware insurance a second time is low, or it's going to be really, really expensive.
And that's a good point. And that actually it's a good segue, guys. You took us perfectly into this next topic, which is going to be our focus for the rest of the webinar until our game at the end of the session, which is how do we prepare our organizations? You have a plethora of different customers here. It looks like we have 57 different attendees right now on the line. All different parts of the organization, C-level, CFOs, CIOs, and others. We have people that are all the way down to the system admin level, and then some lines of business owners who are more focused on, hey, how do I protect my line of business? And so what we've seen is across right now, about 95% of breached records and things that are occurring are happening in kind of one of three different sectors because they're just really prominent and they're really easy, quote unquote, to get into more than others. which is government, retail, technology. Those three tend to be a huge focus, but they're not the only places that are affected. So what do you guys, and let's start with you, James, because we started with Scott last time. James, what's your thoughts on what's the best way for organizations to start off in developing a strategy, and then how to test that strategy to make sure that the security is up to par?
Well, incident response plan. I mean, start there. I mean, I've done presentations on, download one from SANS or NIST, or find a framework that you like, do it, create it, get buy-in from everybody. Because here's the reason you want buy-in from everybody. Let's say you build an incident response plan that says, in case of ransomware, number one, turn off my internet. It's common. If you have the buy-in when you create that plan, and you hit ransomware and you go and knock off your internet right away, people are going to scream. People are going to yell. They're going to gnash teeth. It's going to be, but if you have the buy-in right away, you're not going to get hammered for it. If you do that, let's say you don't have that plan in place and you don't have that buy-in from executive management, and you get hit with ransomware and you arbitrarily, because that's what it would seem like, make a decision to turn off my internet, that's a resume generating event. No matter whether it was the right or wrong, doesn't matter. They're gonna probably hammer you and throw you out the door. Thanks for saving our business. Leave. So that creating an incident response plan and test it. So Napoleon said that no plan survives contact with the enemy. So you have to then test the plan, do a tabletop exercise, do a day where you say, okay, here's what we're going to do. I had one company, they had this beautiful plan, and their whole plan was turn off the internet. That was step one. Well, they got hit with ransomware. They trot up to the main data closet. It's locked. And they said, well, who has the key? Well, the IT manager. Where is he? He's on a cruise. Where's the key? He had the key with him. And because they not tested the plan, there was such a single point of failure that I was like, really? So you've got to test the plan, make sure that you think through all of those things, and then like a backup plan. What is your backup plan? Do you have a backup plan that is going to survive ransomware? 75% of backups fail when you need them. I mean, that's a statistic that is crazy. But if you don't have a backup that is going to make sure that you can really recover your entire enterprise, do you know if your backup could make you so you could, let's say you got hit with your entire network down. Are your backups enough to come back online and get back in business within 2 days, whatever your time frame is? If the answer is no, then you need to change your backup plan. So the military was 3-2-1, right? 3 backups, 2 different mediums, 1 offsite. And there are a lot of backup technologies out there that they create a backup that's immutable. So you create the backup and then it moves on, and you can't touch that backup again, and you can't write to it again. You should have that. You should have it in place, and don't find out the day you get hit with ransomware that, oh, our backups really didn't work so well, right? So those to me are the 2 things, have an incident response plan, have buy-in from everybody who's in that, and then number 2, make sure you have a good backup plan that's been tested as well. Test them both.
And James, that's a good point. And Scott, before you answer this question, I want you to answer that question, but also add something to it. Is this just an IT discussion, or does it go beyond the IT part of the organization to other lines of business? Go ahead.
It goes beyond. It's a top-down understanding. You have to get buy-in from the C levels in order to make change and in order to get things put into position that it has to be. I'm going to piggyback on what James said with the understanding of backup, IRP, disaster recovery planning. Number 1, yes, it has to be tested. It's not really effective unless it's been verified. But number 2, write it down. Have it established as a written policy. You never know who's not going to be available during the necessity of IRP. There has to be a playbook to work by. And if it's not written down, if it's in one guy's head, it's not effective, because that one guy may not be available when it comes time to needing and using it.
I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone into a company or a city. I've done municipalities that have been hit with ransomware, and I'm standing there in the planning room, and they're trying to create a plan after they're down. And the amount of stress that they're creating, they're asking me, and I'm like, whoa, not a decision maker in your world. Figure it out, but they haven't thought ahead of it. Don't create your plan in the middle of crisis. That never goes well.
And every pandemic plan that was utilized in COVID-19 was that effort, right? It was after the fact. They didn't have any preparation for it at all. Tech Republic made a statement that almost half, 46% of global businesses have faced at least one cybersecurity threat. 46%, half of the businesses around the world. Think about this. If you're not educating your users, and this is going to be my next thing of what you need to do. If you're not educating your users to be understanding of what threat looks like, to understand what their requirements are in dealing with a threat, what their steps are, who they're supposed to notify, what are they supposed to do on their systems, how does this actually look? If you're not taking the time to educate your users, then you're going to get infected because they're on the inside. If you look at like a castle, you've got a great moat and you got a tall door and you got guards, but they're already on the inside. And if they make a mistake, then the infection happens, and it happens fast. And before you can probably even put a finger to what happened, it's throughout the entire enterprise, including any VPN association and spread to branches and other types of infection spread. So think about maturing the understanding of your users as a great step of prevention in the idea of a cyber threat.
And ransomware, the thing about ransomware now is that, initially when ransomware came out, it would hit an endpoint. It would encrypt something on your endpoint. That's not reality anymore. They know that you're more likely to pay to get your servers back. And so the criminals are really starting to recognize that if I spend a little bit more time in the network, maybe I can get a sysadmin to log in on that machine, and I can then go after the server, right? So persistence is the next step of the game. And I actually sent out a warning a couple of weeks ago about BIOS attacks. There were Chinese hackers that were going after BIOS and firmware on servers. And that's their goal, and they would survive a reboot. And their ability to launch that attack, they could survive a reboot. So think about your world now. We think we're going to reboot everything and it's going to be okay. Well, that's not the case with ransomware. So if I get your servers and I get your database server and then I get your MDM server, so I launch ransomware down onto all your mobile devices. Now all your devices that are connected, like you're saying, through your VPN are infected as well. And what if I infect up your supply chain? So whoever you're connected to, like you're a subcontractor for somebody. I mean, that's what I'm looking at is I can cause you more reputational damage, and you're more likely to pay me if I kill your server than I do if I kill an endpoint.
That's a great point, guys. And the analogy that Scott brought up of a castle and the moat and the castle walls, inner and so on, is a great example. The number one thing that I have seen, at least, and I'm sure you guys would probably agree with this, the number one thing I see is the most common mistake is we look at security from an outwards in approach, protecting from the outwards, going inwards, but we forget, let's start at the very bare necessities, start at the most microscopic level and go outwards from there as well. Because if we're just protecting it from one direction, we're completely missing everything from disgruntled employees to the ransomware attacks that might just wait for months to actually do anything, etc. So there's a lot of different things to think of there, guys. So real quick, we have only about 6 minutes left for these questions here, and I see we have one question in the chat bar. So again, guys, feel free to put any questions in the chat bar. We'll get to a couple of them right here. But let's start off with you, Scott, answering this one. So Sharon asked, what is the best training program for our employees and about security and how to be more prepared for cybersecurity threats and how to approach that?
You want a training program that is not one and done. It's a consistent, repetitious offering of understanding. It's something that delivers throughout the year. It constantly tests. And if a user cannot recognize a threat, then they need to have education applied to that understanding. They need to be trained of what they did wrong. It's not a punishment for failing the attempt of recognition of threat. What it is we want to improve your understanding, what you did wrong, what you needed to understand, what you missed about that particular email that basically could have been threatening to our enterprise. It's important to have a platform that works that. KnowBe4, James mentioned earlier, is perfect for that. It provides direct training associated to fail. So you got your testing that's continuous, it's random, it's not the same test every single time. You're constantly being tasked on different levels of testing. And then if you do fail, you've got that training aspect behind it that increases that awareness for that user to be smarter the next time that threat comes across that laptop or desktop.
Yeah, and two things to add to that. One, I've seen a lot of companies actually implement sort of a positive reinforcement plan where you report phishing and the person who reports the most phishing successfully in a month gets like a $10 gift card. That is very effective. It's a little competitive, kind of throws in a positive wrinkle to it. The second step is that when you work with a company like KnowBe4, you want to track what is successful in phishing. So if I send a phishing attack that says I'm a customer service representative, it's typically more successful than something like a free gift card. I always laugh in that if I send an email in that says corporate payroll, people are more likely to click on something that says corporate payroll than they are of something that is less curiosity driven. So curiosity is a killer, and so sometimes you can track those kind of successes, and so it's very interesting. So I thought that was
It's a good point. And Shannon, just is a great question. And I just want you to know, number one, NetGain is a channel partner for KnowBe4. We'll be happy to help you with that. But number two, it can be vertically oriented. So we can make sure that the questions, the challenges, the threats that are provided for our users to get their understanding about threat are focused towards your vertical.
Yep, absolutely.
No, thanks, guys. That's a great answer. We've got 1 minute left, guys, so super short here, but let's go ahead and do some closing thoughts. Scott, let's go ahead and start with you on some closing thoughts.
Yeah, guys, I want you to take security at its highest level of importance, and I want you to work with your Cs to get them to understand why security is important, where your gaps are, where your immaturities are in your security posturing. Use a layered approach to security. Don't put a one-stop guard in place and expect it to be effective. Use a layered approach to all of your cyber controls as you develop them. One of the things that we mentioned earlier, James mentioned earlier, was MFA. Don't stand on a password as your individual guard for authentication. Have a second layer that an attacker would have to achieve to be successful in being able to utilize your accounts in manipulation of your authentication. It's certainly just so important to have that understanding. And please, as James also mentioned, please verify your ability to recover. That's what's going to help you sleep good at night. It's going to let you know that you can recover and that it's been proven. That's all I got for you.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I mean, so, you're here listening to this, so that means that in your mind, this is something that's important to you. Seize the day, move forward, and continue to have those security conversations internal to your network. I don't care what level you are inside of your business. You have the ability to start trying to push this conversation, and every step you take towards security, every step you take towards better preparedness, every step you take towards planning will save you money in the end and will help you make better decisions when the bad day comes. And I'm sorry, statistically, it's going to come. If I was to stand there right now, I would say there's a 1 in 4 chance in any 1 year for you to be hit by a ransomware attack. So why not plan ahead? Why not start now? But that's my encouragement to you. There's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of companies out there. Work with a company like NetGain. Let's have the conversation. It doesn't hurt to talk about it. So let's talk about it, see where you're going, and at a minimum, get a third-party security evaluation. Have a company come in and look at your network from an external source, test phishing, test internal controls. Then at least you know what you're talking about, where your threats are, where your vulnerabilities are, and you're going to have a different mindset when you realize that you do have vulnerabilities. I've run into too many companies that say we're secure. Really? Okay, I'll be back in a few months, because it's just the way it happens. Nobody is completely secure, and you're never going to avoid it, but you can mitigate it and make sure the damage can be limited to a very small area.
No, that's great points, guys. And Scott and James, thank you so much for the time today, guys. I hope you get something out of it today. Don't be scared. Don't be like the Chicken Little running around with like the sky is falling. I know that can be the case in 2020, but don't do that. The old saying is the best saying here. Yes, it's good to hope for the best, but we need to plan for the worst. And don't be scared. Let's be confident. Let's have these discussions. Let's test these plans ahead of time. And the best thing to do, guys, is reach out to NetGain, to your NetGain team, to your HPE team. Let's have these discussions more in depth, and let's create a plan. Again, nothing's as good as the foundation on a house. Same way with a plan. Let's have that. Guys, thank you so much for attending today, to being a great audience. And if you have any questions, let us know. My name's Eric Powers. It's been a pleasure moderating today's event. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to you, Megan. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to James, and thank you to Scott for your insights today. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar on FBI Insights on Fighting Cybercrime. Enjoy the rest of your day.